Hi, Jon Taylor. What do you have for us today?
Yeah, I was referencing with Tammy before. I was in Phoenix last weekend for the CSAT symposium, and I kept having this thought come to my mind the entire time, and especially after I got to see a presentation that Alex Kidd did on love addiction, and Alex's approach to people in their struggle has a lot to do with neurobiology and essentially understanding how two-person psychology and her theoretical bent, like we've talked about a little bit in previous recent work, not workshops, webinars, is that everything happens relationally for human beings. We're formed, our personality, our sense of self. So I was thinking all weekend about two-person psychology and how it is and isn't present in existing recovery models. And I think it's pretty important, not just from my perspective as a couples therapist and not just from the purview of this webinar, which is relational skills you can use from day one. But I don't think you quite get the whole picture of healing, change, recovery if you're not thinking in terms of at least two-person systems and relationships. Because I think it's a foundation of reality. Even if you're a single person who lives by yourself and has very limited contact with other people, you are still affected by the people around you and you affect them. So for the webinar today, I'm going to take, this is by no means a representative sample of all early recovery advice or slogans that you hear. It's the ones that I could think of on my way to work today and that I could remember by the time I got to the office. So actually, if you hear more, if you have more of these slogans or pieces of advice that you want to run through the two-person psychology filter, put those in the questions, put those in the chat, and we'll talk about them. I'll add them to my list. But I'm taking these early recovery slogans, mantras, pieces of advice, and I'm going to run it through the two-person psychology detector. And we're going to talk about how that aligns with two-person thinking, and how some pieces of advice, how to turn them into two-person thinking, I think get a lot more mileage out of them. So let's start with the famous my side of the street, your side of the street. You hear this early on for couples. I've got to focus on my side of the street. You got to focus on your side of the street. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what's one person about that. I'm just going to put up the two-person psychology framework on that. And if you feel challenged by any of that, there's a rough edge to keep thinking about, working on, looking at. So, what I think this saying gets right in two-person psychology is we each have a role that we play in every relationship, and responsibility for ourselves, our feelings, our actions, our thoughts, our beliefs, and their appearance in the world, and the power we have to influence our own side of the street, our own life, is paramount. You don't have functional, mature relationships without two people accepting this reality. I am who I am. I do what I do, and it does have an impact on you. This is why this advice is given, is to try to get people out of each other's business a little bit more. Now, um, the thing to remember here is this is two sides of the same street. So think about your neighborhood. Think about when you're out in public. Let's say across the street, you hear a loud crashing noise, shouting, and commotion. You see commotion across the street. Even if you're separated by two lanes of traffic, are you going to go on as if nothing is happening? Are you going to have no spike in your adrenaline? Are you going to have no concerns, fears, or even curiosity? Of course not, because this is two sides of the same street. There's an ecosystem. What happens on one side affects the other side. And what I do to you on your side of the street, or what I throw over to your side of the street, is going to come back to me. Because this is all the same, this is all the same street. There is always some gap between our two sides of the street, there's always some gap in total security. Because you're in a relationship with another human being, both people have agency. Human beings, it takes a long time to study a specific human being and to be able to start to predict with some kind of accuracy what they might be thinking or feeling or what they will do. But those predictions are never 100%, because human beings are variable and there's always a lot of different things going on. So with this two separate sides of the street that are connected by the same street, both parties have to be aware of and willing to live in the current gap of uncertainty in the relationship rather than trying to single-handedly either change factors for your partner that you don't like are going on their side of the street, or to single-handedly strong-arm your partner into changing the factors on their own side of the street. So over the last year, I've heard this verbatim from two different partners I've worked with in a couples context, regarding either them traveling or their spouse traveling. And the mantra, the acceptance of the insecurity is he will relapse if he's going to relapse. Now, this isn't a fatalism. This isn't a so I give up. This isn't so my life is going to be terrible. This is a recognition that I can only talk to him so much. I can only point out so much from my side of the street what I need him to manage on his side of the street. At some point, I have to accept, I have to stop pouring all my energy into making sure the total street is okay. And I really have to look at myself. And this shift, he will relapse if he's going to relapse, was immediately followed by increased stability and well-being for this partner, because it freed up energy. It allowed some grief to start, which frees up energy too. And these two individuals got to dig deeper, got to sink deeper into how to provide their own sense of safety, how to find their own sense of self. So it's not a cool indifference, which I think is usually how this slogan gets distorted. You don't worry about me, I won't worry about you, we'll just do our thing. That's not a relationship. It's more of a complex understanding that I only have so much control over my own real estate, and the further something gets, the more separate from me something gets, the less control and influence I have over it. So like good neighbors, we recognize we live on the same street, and I recognize if I'm going to do something to you, it's going to come back to me because we're all part of this ecosystem. You could think about it as like one of those closed terrariums. If I put an agent in that terrarium for one plant, not considering what it will do to the other, I've affected the whole ecosystem and maybe made it hard for both to survive. So we keep our side of the street clean, not for appearance's sake, because we recognize the interconnectedness. It's that, I think it's a Swahili phrase, Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. That's actually, my understanding is across a lot of different cultures on the African continent, that idea is first and foremost. It's that the individual is inextricable from the community. We're all part of the same organism. Now, another piece of early recovery advice: whatever you put in front of your recovery, you will lose. So I think in the two-person thinking on this, we have to define recovery. Recovery of what? And notice in the one-person thinking, we think recovery from, what am I getting away from? In the two-person thinking, we're looking at what am I recovering? What am I claiming back? What am I putting in its rightful place? Secure functioning is what we are recovering after there's been a rupture of trust through infidelity. And we put the focus on secure functioning, which is the right behaviors, because that's what sets the stage for trust and intimacy to be able to develop. So in two-person systems, you have to think in terms of concrete, performables, tangible dynamics, not undefined outcomes like intimacy or trust, which might sound weird because intimacy and trust are really powerful ideas. And I think everybody has their own. You tell somebody, hey, do you trust this person? Everybody probably has their own metrics for which they gaze at, but therein lies the problem, is that's an individual thing. My experience of trust, my experience of intimacy, which couples do have to deal with at some point. I always say to couples, the marker of fairness in your relationship is if both parties feel like it's fair. If both parties feel like it's fair, it's not fair. But from the get-go in recovery, it's a challenging ourselves. Okay, you're saying you need to be able to trust me. What does that even mean? So early in recovery, we get focused on what are the actions that I would undertake consistently that would allow you to more easily consider trusting me. So recovery from a lapse in fairness, recovery from mutual lapses in mutual protection, lapses in shared power, etc. Both parties should do whatever their individual recovery needs dictate. So in this, whatever you put in front of your recovery, whatever you put in front of your relationship, remember, two individuals are part of a relationship. Two-person psychology does not exclude the individuals. It folds in the needs of individuals under a bigger, more robust, interconnected umbrella. So both parties should be able to pursue what they need, what their individual needs and recovery dictate, as long as it's fair to the other. So, and we'll talk about these in some of the other pieces of advice a little later on. There are some, I think, out of the box recovery approaches that don't consider very well fairness for the other. And those are the ones that usually get a lot of pushback. Both partners never get fully on board with. One or both parties are wary of it, because again, like we're two sides of the same street. We're introducing something into the relationship ecosystem that doesn't smell of fairness. So when you have dictates and demands in your individual recovery that your partner may have a hard time getting on board with or doesn't understand, think, how do we structure this so that it becomes fair for both of us? So if it's, I'm really upside down in my addiction and I need a meeting every day, and that's a big time commitment, a big attention commitment. That one to me is pretty easy to figure out how to make it fair. How do we get you commensurate time? How do we get you commensurate support on the back end? I realize that every hour I take from our family, every hour away from the children is a double burden on you. So a simple, let's trade time. Let's make sure that you get as much protected time as I do. Let's make sure you get as much protected focus as I do. Let's see if there's anything else in there. This always takes work. Defining what we are going to recover and how we're going to recover. This always takes work together to determine the parameters. What does fairness look like between the two of us? What does mutual protection look like between the two of us? How are we going to share power and authority? That is always something that has to be negotiated and dreamed up by both parties. Or it's a mandate. And generally, when you have a one-person mandate that is trying to set policy long-term in the relationship, you're going to get an uprising. Because again, two-person psychology respects that as individuals, we will not think completely about each other without communicating, without working it out. Another thing, this particularly pertains to disclosure. I hear and see a lot of, sometimes I see this from sponsors, sometimes even it sickens me to say so, I'll hear this from therapists. Oh, you don't need to tell your partner about that. That would be too damaging. Or on the other side of the coin, sometimes I will hear or see your partner who has betrayed you must tell you everything that you ask, no matter what. Now, in order to have fairness and shared power, both parties have to share information. We have to be on the same page. Both parties, when it comes to deciding what to disclose and whatnot and how to share information, both parties have to demonstrate executive functioning when making decisions around information that comes into the relationship. In other words, you can't just go with a gut feeling. You have to think it through. You have to put it in and out of the relationship context. You really have to slice that from every angle you can think of. Um, that is best done with both individuals, with their individual therapists, and collectively as a couple, looking at relationships, locations, things that may be better without detail, and other things that it may seem trivial, but the increased detail makes all the difference. So in other words, it's a lot of work, not just our gut feeling. It's a lot of work to actually scaffold, critically think through, why do I need to know this? Why might this do harm if this comes out? You can't just go on both people's feelings. I've seen couples stuck for years in just a gut feeling that says, I should or shouldn't tell you this, or you should or shouldn't tell me that. So this is why careful preparation and support in a disclosure is important. I liken untherapeutically supported disclosures. I liken that to if your neighbor was a surgeon and you had to have your appendix out and you said, hey, buddy, can I borrow you? Could I borrow your operating theater and your tools? My cousin here is going to take out my appendix. It's irresponsible. It's dangerous. That it really has to be something supported. Each individual should be able to explain in simple terms why or why not something should be discussed together or information should be shared. So this is important for the person who's done the betraying and the secret keeping. There may be this deep, deep, dark thing that they carry around, they have a lot of shame about, and their reflex is, I want to tell you about it because I want to become unburdened. What if the parameters of it make that person's home, community, internal world unsafe? What if the person says, I don't want that in my head. I don't want that level of detail in my head. So it's not just a matter of keeping back for secrecy's sake. Sometimes there's a keeping back for the sake of well-being and safety long-term in the relationship. So the reasoning why I shouldn't tell my partner the nitty-gritty details about this has to be understood by the person who's holding that information as well. If you can't explain it in simple terms, you haven't internalized it and you're not likely to do it. So it takes a lot of work to get to that level of understanding, but it's important. If you can't explain it, you haven't decided it or deliberately chosen it. An example of this, I was working with a couple the other day, and he was the secret keeper betrayer. He had a lapse in a boundary, not related to sobriety, but related to some accountability around his time and location. And she was quite upset, understandably. And as is his habit, he can't handle her anger very well. And he starts, trying to shut it down and trying to strong arm into like, hey, we need to make a relationship repair here. So this is the condition I find him in the couple session. And she says to him, I need to be able to be angry with you. And I'm thinking two-person psychology. And instead of weighing in on that, we're asking him, I stopped her and I said, could you explain why that's a good idea? And she looked at me a bit. Luckily, they know me very well. She looked at me a bit almost like, oh my gosh, like, isn't it self-evident? And she said, like, very simply, it was beautiful. She said, I think we ought to have room for all of each other's emotion. There shouldn't be an emotion that we don't have room for in this relationship. And anger is one of them. And she said, if you or I do anything to limit that space there is for all emotion, or if you or I handle emotion in such a way that makes each other unwilling to engage with it, we're not doing what we should be doing here. And I was stunned. I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I wrote it down and I stole it from her. And he got it. He said, I can see. It's not just about the anger, it's about everything. How we do one thing is how we're going to do everything. She says, yes. So you could see in him, it wasn't easy, but you could see the disarming. You could see how less important it became for him to defend himself from her anger, because she also put it in terms of, you'll benefit from this down the road too. I will make the same room for any and all of your feelings when you do this for me. Another thing you'll hear in early recovery, or you'll read a lot, all addicts are, all betrayed partners are, these broad sweeping statements. So interpersonal psychology, which is how two beings interface and are interrelated to each other, acknowledges variation among the population. I think we talked about this when I did humanistic psychology. Humanistic psychology said that people are people, not statistics. So the only valid study of human behavior is one individual at a time, not looking for broad patterns. So two-person psychology has space for assumptions and hunches, suspicions, but we check out and test our biases and fears rather than running forward unchecked with them. So fear is part of the human condition, anxiety is part of the human condition, but in two-person psychology, just like cortisol in the body, which is a perfectly natural stress hormone, we are careful not to inject or stay in large amounts of it for long periods of time because it's corrosive. So we don't run unchecked with our fears. We test those biases, we test those assumptions through asking questions, observing behavior, um, hashing things out in couples therapy. It's the same with our emotions. And this is what I talked about just before. You could be angry, you should and you must, but what happens if you only pursue your anger based on how you feel in the moment and it's not connected to the larger picture? Now, this partner, with her history with anger, she was famous for, she would literally say things like, I don't care what you feel right now. That would be part of her anger. Um, you just have to take this. Now, when she was thinking in the large picture, she was no less angry, it was no less incisive, but she was so in command of how it got delivered, what it focused on. She used less words, not because she didn't have them, but because she knew, okay, anger expressed, I've said it, it's clear as a bell, now it's up to you. Um, so we check out those assumptions, we check out our biases, we look at the larger picture. Two-person psychology accepts that it's difficult or even dangerous to fully interface with or relate to another human being. So two-person psychology is not this rosy view of all people are basically good, and if you just love each other, it's enough. Two-person psychology looks at the inherent risk, but we don't accept reflexive avoidance as an acceptable alternative. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. We don't do that because we realize that avoidance doesn't ground us in reality. And reality, as close we get to it, is the only hope that a two-person system has. So we deal with problems, we deal with concerns, we deal with hunches, we deal with um, uh, paranoia, anxiety. We deal with all of that directly because we know if we don't look at it, it gets scarier. We know if we don't interface with it, it becomes bigger and more unmanageable. It's important to think about who your partner really is, what their actions mean, and to gather what they feel and think as part of your picture. So there's a lot of different aspects we're looking at that make up who is this person. How your partner reacts under stress versus not under stress, what your partner says versus what they do, how your partner behaves in private or moments that they think are private versus in public. It's all part of that picture. And so we end up with an individual, not a set of behaviors or patterns, which also doesn't lend itself very well to blanket advice. So again, individual specific, couple specific, individual specific work is important. Last one. Sobriety will solve or alleviate all of your relationship problems. Sometimes I see this overtly sold, and that really concerns me. Sometimes I see it implied and not addressed. Um, it is true that relationship cycles can be altered by just one person changing their tone, approach, being, or reactions. That happens. It only takes one person to change a relationship cycle. However, think about this. Are you wanting to just have a different cycle, or are you wanting to live outside of cycles altogether? I think when we're in cycles and patterns, intimacy is hard or non-existent. It's about reactivity, not about presence, executive functioning, intention. We're getting what we want. So living with intention can only be achieved by two people working on a relationship and constructing it in a co-equal way. So in other words, um, sobriety is a prerequisite to building a healthy relationship, but it is not the mechanism that a healthy relationship is built with. A healthy relationship is built with two people coming together and navigating their differences, their fears, their history, all of it. So like I said, if you have other pieces of advice you've gotten early in recovery that you want to put through this filter, go ahead and put them in the Q&A.
This is great. When you're talking about the first one, my side of the street, you talked about the terrarium, and here in Arizona we have the biosphere. It was a big experiment, and they put certain things in the biosphere. The people ended up being the most interesting and challenging, but there were species of things that they did not put in, for various reasons, because it's a closed container. But I was thinking that it's like, it is a closed container, and a relationship, to a large degree is. And so if we are not paying attention to what affects one part of it, it does negatively impact everything. So,
On that note, an interesting
oh
thing I
yeah.
learned about the
Hmm.
biosphere not that long ago.
Yeah.
So because it was an enclosed system, there was no wind, no moving air, and there were trees grown in there. And the trees could only get to a certain height and they would fall over because the wind and the air resistance is what builds the toughness in the trees. And that was not something considered. So even struggle, adversity can be something that we instinctively try to clean up off of both sides of the street. And we do that at the peril of our relationships.
Yeah, and that is true here. Uh, we have some trees in Arizona that go, we don't get a lot of rain, so the roots go this way, and guess what topples the quickest? Are those, when there's a wind, those are the
Mhm.
ones that fall, the trees that get the deeper roots, yes, that have had adversity, are able to tolerate that. So I love that you're talking, like you said, consistently work together. And when you're talking about the anger, you said, you said, one of the ways it presented was, I don't care how you feel, and what I think I heard you saying, but I wanted clarification, is this is one of those patterns where they went, okay, this is not, I'm changing how I say that. In my anger, I'm going to present it in a different way.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah. She
right?
changed
Okay.
that to I don't have a lot of space for how you feel right now. Which
Oh, okay.
which was
Yeah.
truer,
Yes.
and also relational and did not sacrifice anything for her. So there's that
Yes.
two-person thinking, even as mad as I am, again, what I put out in here is going to come back. It's going to be done to me too, because I'm doing it to my system. She put it out in a more precise relational way, again, not sacrificing anything, and not as a difficult pill to swallow.
Right. I was gonna say, because in the I don't care how you feel, it's like that completely closes every, form of interaction down. I was like, okay, you don't. I mean, that to me would be relationship breaking, versus like, okay, I don't have a lot of space for your feelings right now, because like this is not working well for me. Makes a whole lot more sense. So okay, so we've got some questions. Yeah, there's one other. Oh, yeah, I actually wrote down what you said too about a relationship needs space for all emotions. Yeah, and I see. I'm going to say this too. I see often where people are afraid. I'm afraid of that other person's reaction, so I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not allowed to say this. I'm not allowed. But it ends up being a really inauthentic relationship, because it doesn't have the broad stance of like, we're here for each other through everything, and handling the uncomfortable is really how, like you're talking about with the wind in the trees, it's like that's how we, solidify our relationship. Okay, the first question: I'm the betrayer, and despite my partner already knowing everything about me, even my darkest and most shameful secrets, writing the full disclosure seems like the hardest thing I ever had to do. I truly believe that she would accept me after full disclosure, but I feel like I still can't face all my defects and behaviors. How can I overcome this?
Beautiful question.
Yeah.
And this I think speaks to I'm gonna make up hopefully this isn't too generous of an assumption, but this speaks to the preparation for this individual in facing their disclosure. There's a recognition of what the hesitancy is, and it's not blaming the partner for you'll be mad or you won't accept me. It's I can't face this. One of the helpful, and it's not the primary goal of disclosure, but it's a helpful secondary gain. I would call it ego death. When you stand before your partner and you've prepared in a sequential, organized, logical way, I am going to give you everything, even what you may already know, but we are going to walk through together. And essentially we're going to look at what a wreck my life has been, how out of control it's been, how off base I've been. Ego is the part of us that tries to protect us from harm. Ego is the part of us that tries to make sure that we look good. Ego is the part of us that tries to give us substance without, or not substance, tries to give us merit without substance. So one thing you may be facing here is not overcoming that reflex, but that reflex, that feeling of like, this is going to be so hard, I don't know if I can face this. That's your ego running out of oxygen, and it's painful. That's a part that's been protecting you. And I would encourage you to take that back to your therapist, take it back to your sponsor, take it back to your support group, and talk about how your image of yourself is going to change as a result of doing this process. And I would examine, are there parts of my image manager, are there parts of how I thought I was, how I carried myself off, that do need to go away? Maybe it's my foundationless assurity that I'm fine and everything's fine. Maybe it's my invulnerability to imperfection, mistakes. Maybe that needs to go. That sounds like that's going to be the hardest part for you in this, is that ego death, that I'm not protecting myself. I'm laying it all bare. And not to be too simplistic, take lots and lots of deep breaths around that and just feel the feelings that are coming up. Don't try to make those go away. Stay on track with what you're doing and what you've committed to. It's a good commitment. Again, I feel in this, I read in this, like there's some good preparation in that. Trust the process. It doesn't have to feel good every step of the way to get a good outcome.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said lean into, therapist and sponsor. I mean, that's the stuff, they really can be the tether for you, during this time. I think about this like with the 4-step too. It's like when we're doing our 4-step, we are, writing down, it feels like all of the horrible stuff. And one of the most freeing things that we do is, working through those steps. If we're searching and fearless moral inventory, if we're really doing that, we are taking ownership of who we are. And I always feel like that's like kind of a starting point. This is where we are right now. But for me, and I bet Jon can say the same thing, it's like as our paths continue in recovery, we grow and change as people, and the people that we were when we did those foundational components is very different because we've continued to do the work to grow and change. So so it's a starting point. It's taking ownership. I know how hard this is for you, but I also appreciate that you're willing to do it, because that shows a lot of willingness to show up for yourself and for the relationship. So I like all of this stuff. I think often, like we're, I'm so afraid, and we think, it's going to kill us. Well, it isn't, like the reality, the fear of the reality is way worse than the actual reality it is. It's like, if you're writing this stuff, you're going to write for 15 minutes, whatever, set a manageable time frame, get support, do grounding, whatever it is that you can do so that you can continue to do that. And I hope you also go, I'm writing all this yucky stuff and it's going to be hard. And this is going to set the stage for moving forward in a different way. So I don't have to continue to be stuck in the quicksand of that stuff. So, okay. Next question. I am I am the betrayer, and I recently opened up to my partner 2.5 years of a relationship about my attraction to minors that I started to work on with therapists 11 years ago, 4 years ago. So before we met, I moved to a place that is located right in front of a school. Thanks to self work and therapy, I never acted out nor wanted to in 4 years. It did not even occur to me that it could be an issue when I chose the place. I'm quite confident that I will never, I will not act out and that I am not a threat. Yet my partner is still asking me to move out. She does not believe me when I say that I manage the triggers, and she is very triggered by me living here. Moving would mean higher rents per month, as I could honestly not find a place for the current rent I am paying. Should I move if it is not for my own recovery, but for hers?
Here's some two-person thinking. This is a really great question in that way.
Mhm.
So as you laid out here, it sounds like from your own personal world, you don't see a reason why you would move, which is fine. If you want to be in a relationship with somebody, we do have to take into account their fears, anxieties, concerns, I would say even desires for what their relationship looks like. Their risk tolerance is what I would say this sounds like. You have to take that into account. People are who they are. And it's not fair in a relationship to have the expectation for this relationship working based on the fact that somebody will change how they feel or what they do. So I would say if you are interested in safety in this relationship, you should probably seriously consider what your partner is asking for you. It's very rare in life that there is a literal price on our safety or our freedom. There is here. And that may be the difference between what you're paying in rent now and what a higher rent, but some security for your partner is. Now, to the last part of that question, should I do it for her, even though it's not for me? No, you shouldn't do it for her. You should do it for what it provides the relationship potentially. So remember, whatever you do or don't do will come back to you. So this is a real issue for your partner. Her feelings, her concerns are real. No amount of your reassuring her is going to change that. Not because you're a liar or she knows something you don't, but because again, people are who they are. So um, I would look at what precedent does it set if this issue and this concern is not handled with sensitivity and care, mutual protection, shared power. What precedent does that set in a relationship? What do you think is likely to come up the next time that you say, and just a dumb example, I don't love that your ex-boyfriend calls you. I don't love that he thinks he can drop by. Just a dumb example. If you're not going to handle this with sensitivity and care, what can you expect from her down the road? If this is destabilizing and unsafe for her and you guys do decide to stay together, what quality of relationship do you have with someone who is in a state of near constant threat, just thinking about how close you live to a school? So I don't have an answer for you. I'm not going to answer should I move out or not. I'm going to invite you to think about those parameters and ask you to check yourself. Am I thinking in a way that denotes that I take this relationship seriously, or am I not? And you live with the outcomes of that. You can't have serious safety and security in a relationship if you don't take it seriously.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking, you talked about building trust, and I was like, building trust would be like, I hear what you're saying. So yeah. Okay. The next one is a comment. Don't go to the hardware store looking for bread.
Okay, so some early recovery advice. Here's
Oh,
the
oh,
two.
that's one. I've not
It
heard
took
that one.
it took me a minute to think,
Okay,
why did they
thanks.
put that in there? Because I asked for it.
Yes. No, because I was like, I was trying to relate it to the other things. I honestly don't know if I've seen that one. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I actually love this one for two-person thinking. I think it encapsulates two-person thinking very, very well. People are who they are. It is unfair, it is ungrounded in reality to expect something from someone immediately when they have not demonstrated that they do that. Now, this made me laugh. Where I live, there's a hardware store, I guess you could call it. It's like an everything store. They used to have this insane army surplus yard that had like decommissioned tanks in it and stuff.
Jeez.
It's called Smith and Edwards. you can get bread at that hardware store. You can get anything at that hardware store. However, in general, people are who they are, and to expect them to produce or perform something that they haven't in the past, are not working on, are not interested in, um, is folly. And so where I see this hitting some two-person thinking early on in recovery is you have to cut some losses, and you have to accept there's a choice right now between my immediate feelings of safety and support, or I can keep putting good money after bad. And I'm not talking about even leaving a relationship. If you're recognizing that your partner is the hardware store and you're needing bread, whatever that may be, all the more important maybe for you to get into a good recovery community. Maybe there's not a listening, empathetic ear. Maybe there's not someone who can easily make space for your feelings. You shouldn't have to go without. You also can't turn your hardware store of a partner into a bakery. So acceptance is important. The best source of change, the only source of change in a relationship, is the change I decide to make to put a better foundation under the relationship. Sometimes that change is brought to my attention because my partner says, I can't do this, won't do this. Here are my concerns. But on an ongoing basis, it's like I talked about before, we can be interested in a relationship that does different cycles, or we could be interested in a relationship that actually exists, thrives, is not cycle dependent. And that transition happens when both partners start looking for their own responsibility and their impact on each other. And that's where the best change comes from is, hey, I realize this might create some difficulty for us, so I'm going to work on it. Or I've heard you've told me this creates some difficulty, and I trust that. I don't want you, it's like our last question, I don't want you to have to worry about that, so I'm going to do something about it. Yeah.
When you're talking about cycles, I was doing a load of laundry earlier, so I was thinking, you know, they're different cycles, but they all do the same thing. So yes, and just switching cycles, from permanent press to bulky load, it still gets. I mean, it's still the end result is the same. So if we are not doing something different, it's maybe slightly different, but it's the same pattern again. So
Mm-hmm.
it would be important to do that. Okay. After passing lie detector with disclosure submitted for actual disclosure, my husband altered his disclosure to remove the fact that he cheated on his ex-wife as well. I am going to ask for another disclosure. How can I ever trust that this time he will be truthful?
So just a comment on good disclosure preparation. By the time the polygraph is being done, both the addicts therapist and the partnership therapist and the polygrapher should have that version of the disclosure, and that should be the one used in disclosure. So as a policy for me, the disclosure that I sign off on is the one that I send to the polygrapher. I don't have my client bring it so that things like this can't happen. When it's disclosure day, I print out the copy of disclosure. I do not have the client bring their own, because unfortunately I've heard this happening before. So just a note on structure. To the question, how do I trust this time that he will be truthful? You don't. I don't think trust is the goal here. I think ongoing longer term detection of deceit, because he's shown you that he's capable of that and that he'll do that. And what I mean is this, you aren't going to be a lie detector for the rest of the relationship. Hopefully in your disclosure process, the thing that comes after the disclosure, the formal disclosure, is an opportunity for you to gather questions and ask for clarification. So the very best lie detector there is whether or not the story someone is telling to you makes sense. So that will be your task after you hear his disclosure, is to go through what you've heard, ask the questions that you need to ask so that you get the information that you need to get, ask the questions that will help you to determine whether or not this story makes sense. And even then, when you get a story that makes sense, you're going to be watching for other behaviors too. So lying like this, deceit like this, is a lack of integrity. So you might have to watch for a while. How does integrity look in the other parts of this person's life? Are they committed to that? I would not rush to trust. And if your partner is throwing that in your face, that's disingenuous. Trust is not the goal here. Exchange of information is the goal here. And then it's up to you to do what you need to get any additional information, insight, clarification, so that you can vet whether or not the story he's telling you makes sense.
I was thinking how many times we have talked on webinars about don't even bother doing a disclosure if you're not going to show up, with truth. And this stuff happens, time and again. And guess what? It gets caught. And then
Yeah.
it not only doesn't set the foundation for healing that the disclosure is supposed to, it sets everything back, even more, and I don't know how to get it through the betraying partner's brains that like, do it right, do it once, but we'll keep saying it. Okay, I'm the betrayed partner and having issues regarding space between. We have our own therapist and a couples therapist. Our conversations are much better and very constructive in relationship building. I am struggling with the times that we are not in a moment of crisis, no slips, no tangible triggers. I'm looking for topics we should be discussing weekly so that I don't feel like we are just ignoring the past. We are only 6 months post disclosure and still very much in the initial stages. I struggle feeling like if we don't talk about it, he is ignoring what happened.
Hmm. Um, First of all, phenomenal opening. If that's what you're experiencing, that's awesome. And I would say, compared to average, that's pretty ahead of the curve to be in that place. Now, my thoughts on that last piece there is, I would wonder if I was your couples therapist and I had you both in the room, I would ask you both, um, what elements of the past do you guys find yourselves thinking about? Maybe that comes up randomly. What reminders are there? Because my guess is that even if someone's actively trying to ignore it, there's parts of the past that trying to come. That's just how the human organism works. Um, so for your partner, it could be he may think more about how you're thinking about the past, and he may not want to set you off. What I'm getting at there is, if I were the couples therapist, I would create a safe container that the past could come into, because the past is not dealt with in a disclosure. The door is open in the disclosure, but feelings are processed. So instead of starting with here are the topics to talk about so it's not getting ignored, I would look at, where does it hurt? Where does it come up for you? Where does it come up for him? What are you both afraid of? What do you continue to think about? If you can bring that into a container where there is collaboration, there's sensitivity, there's all of that secure functioning stuff. That's what couples therapy is. The whole like get so that you're on the same team and function. That's the coaching. That's the Kevin Skinner calls it the don't kill each other phase of couples therapy. Real couples therapy is let's handle the reality of what our history has been and what our future hopefully will be. So that's where I would start. If it's hurting, if it's bothering you, I would talk about it. You might need to start in couples therapy. But yeah, we don't heal from the past by talking about it in an in-depth way and then ignore it. We integrate it. Yeah.
But I would love that you're talking about starting couples therapy. So you've got a container and you've got someone who can help guide you, because often that's a bit challenging. Or maybe you try something and if see what works, and you can always bring that to your couples therapist too. So, but I love that you're like, it sounds like you are really both on a path towards healing and recovery for the relationship too. So my husband says if he's not asked a specific question and omits information, he does not consider it a lie. That's called a lie of omission. Yeah. Like there's actually, we talk about lies of commission and omission all the time. So he also says the most important thing for him in a relationship is the person to believe him without asking questions. Is this typical addict thinking? Now, this goes to your blanket thing of like, you can't cover a blanket over everything, but what are your thoughts?
So sorry, I have to say what I'm thinking here.
Mm-hmm.
My first thought, he does not consider it a lie. How convenient for him. He gets to be the arbiter of what is a lie and what is not. As Tammy so astutely pointed out, that is a lie. It's called a lie of omission. Um, there are lots of different ways that we can deceive. And what you think is lying or not does not matter at all compared to what lying actually is. So the last question is this typical addict thinking. One of the speakers at Symposium, I cannot remember how to say her last name, but her first name is Ramani, and she's an expert on narcissism, Dr. Ramani. And she showed the correlation between narcissistic personality traits and folks who struggle with sex addiction. There is a high correlation. So I'm not diagnosing your husband. I wouldn't do that without meeting them at all. But when you say typical addict thinking, um, there is a lot of narcissistic traits in addict thinking. There are also, yep, that's the name, Durvasula,
Yeah.
Ramani
I'm
Durvasula.
glad you can say that. So I have her written down. I'm going to see if I can get her to do a podcast with Dr. Rob. So,
Oh yeah, she was
yeah.
great. So it is typical addict thinking. It could also be indicative of personality traits that do not play well with relationships. And remember, personality traits don't really change over time. The positive or the negative ones, if it's a trait of personality, it's pretty fixed over time. So what I would say, if your partner was watching this, and maybe bring him here for this, I would say that's great for you if you want to have a relationship where someone will believe you without having to ask follow-up questions. That's great for you if you want to live in a world where you get to define what truth and lies are. However, I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong. Your partner has a problem with that. So you've got a problem with that because that's what two-person psychology is. It's not what I want. It's not what I think. It's not about me scaffolding and building reality. It's about us doing this together. And if your partner says, sorry, doesn't work for me, you've got a problem. And you either need to decide whether or not you want to play on terms that are actually fair in a relationship, or whether you want to be the God of your own universe. And if you want to be the God of your own universe, go have it. Go live in your own universe, go live by your own rules, but you may not be able to have this person come with you. And that's the reality too. In two-person psychology, we recognize that anything I do of my one-person will and I try to enforce across different people, I'm doing them harm. It's a natural human tendency. We all do it. We all want to do it. But in two-person psychology, we recognize that when I try to overextend my influence, make my reality yours, make my desire your desires, I am doing you harm. So if you can't get by in the world in any other way, accept it and quit hurting people. Go be the God of your own universe, but quit trying to drag people through the reality you want to live in. This person has her own, your partner has her own wants, desires, needs, reality. And if you're not going to help create a relationship where there's room for that too, you're not ready for one.
And this is like not even just in a primary relationship. I was like nobody wants to be in a relationship where it's like you have to unilaterally believe everything I say. There's no dialogue, just yes, almost like yes master, yes master. I was like,
Yeah.
gosh, that's a horrible, that's not a relationship. That's just a, I mean, now if you're an employer and you can, demand
That's
behaviors or something like that, that maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, the alternative to secure functioning, if you're not going to hold up fairness, justice, sensitivity, mutual protection, shared power, effective regulation and co-regulation of distress, if you're not going to do that stuff, your alternative is dictatorship or slavery.
That does not sound like a relationship. So
A
I'm
lot of
sorry,
people.
partner. Like, yeah, like,
Yeah.
and Debbie McRae is fantastic with, the story you're telling, the story I'm telling myself is that you don't want to be in a relationship, whatever. She's fantastic with that. If you haven't, she's got a boundaries course starting next week. It's about building trust. And I'm going to pull the information real quick for that work group. But if you have not taken that one, it could be really useful for you. And then the last comment so far is you're a treasure, Jon Taylor. Your ability to share your wisdom and clarity is such a gift. We agree. We
Thank you.
absolutely agree. So, but we have time. We have 3 minutes. Anybody else have another question or comment, I'm going to throw the chat. We've got work groups, but the boundary one for partners is starting next week. But we have sex addiction 101, all of those. So there's always more. But any other questions? Oh, let's see. I'll answer live. Done. Otherwise, I guess we'll see you in a few weeks. So
Yeah.
thanks, everyone. Great
Bye, everybody.
questions. Great topic. This was really good, as usual. I got a whole bunch of notes. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
See y'all.